Welcome to episode 422 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. With our last show before a hypothetical holiday break, you know me, I'll probably have something out next week. I'm joined by Emile to try our best to jump back into the Barca world as we try to reset and get ourselves into gear for the rest of the season. How's that sound, Emile?
That sounds good to me. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I think
Yep.
we're ready for the holiday. I think we're ready for maybe a
Yeah.
2 or 3 day break. Unfortunately, here in the U.S., if you're anywhere in the U.S., you're getting absolutely pelted by. It's supposed to be, I'm speaking in Fahrenheit here. Apologies to our Celsius listeners,
Yep.
but Fahrenheit is in the teens, so basically 20 degrees below freezing.
Yeah.
Even if you're Celsius, what you need to know is it's below freezing here by a little bit in the U.S. So that's going to be the whole little weekend. So it's a whole thing. So we're going to try to
So,
travel, but it's sleeting where I'm trying to see my family for the first time in a year. So it's
oh
sleeting
man.
though, and it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. We'll see
Well,
how it goes.
my in-laws are actually in Minneapolis, and
Oh yeah, it's like negative
yeah,
30 there. Yeah.
it's there. Yeah, it's supposed to be like 10 inches of snow, and I just checked right now. The temperature is -8, and they're supposed to get like 10 inches of snow with like 50-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, well,
It's
that's
bonkers.
why you live in Barcelona. Well, not the
Correct.
primary reason, but that is a reason you live in Barcelona. A reason my wife and I eventually want to make sure we get
My
back.
my wife does a victory lap every time we're here,
Yeah,
and Minneapolis gets pelted with something like this.
it's a disaster. It's a disaster. Well, all right. Speaking of Barcelona, let's put our focus back
Yep.
to where you're living now, because I do
Yes.
kind of want to set the table. I did kind of set the table, I should say, from yesterday when I guessed Xavi's wish list. That's available on YouTube, so you can check that out. What his wish list would be. It was really for the spring more than the summertime even. But that list included winning the Liga, starting negotiations with the Busquets successor, fortifying Frankie de Jong's spot in the squad, and keeping everybody healthy. So,
Yep.
Emile, after hearing those 4 things, do you agree with that list in that order? And is there anything I missed? Obviously, the De Jong one's little bit of a stretch. I think probably keeping everybody healthy even more so than individually worrying about De Jong. But as far as
Yeah.
transfer business, like Busquets stuff, like getting whatever it is, pre-contracts, we can do that in a second. But yeah, is there anything you think I missed before we get into the actual list?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, there's always the fortifying the back line a bit more. That you know, I, right back is an ongoing sort of question. But in the absence of that, I mean, I think if they're able to accomplish those 4 things, it would be a rousing success over the next 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, I mean, when I say fortify Frankie de Jong too,
Yeah.
I'm half talking about his wages. Honestly,
Oh
I'm not
yeah.
talking about his spot in the squad, but the other part is, will he agree to a reconstructuring his wage deal? I should probably put renewing Alejandro Balde somewhere on that list. Of course,
Right.
I didn't even mention that yesterday. But when I say also start negotiating with Busquets' successor, like this is. I had a lot of little allusions to like the holiday stuff, but this is more like a Christmas story kind of thing than it is like the Christmas morning on in like Whoville. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's 2 different references there. Like this isn't like some big. I mean, before the Grinch, spoiler alert, before the Grinch steals all the presents, and then there's all the Juan Hooglers and the Wim Bobblers, the
Yep.
little Who children are playing. So it's not
Yep.
like that's not going to be this for Barcelona. That might be this for Real Madrid, who are sitting on 600 million euros. It might be PSG, who have an unlimited amount of money. But for Barcelona, come January, there's no big presents going to be found under the tree. But
No.
I think what could happen very well, again, when there's smoke, there's always a little bit of fire. A pre-contract can be signed with N'Golo Kante, who has been injured for almost of this year, but is 32. Still probably has a bit to go. He's still on the top of his game before he got injured. Still one of the best at his position. Again, 2 years younger than Busquets. So I could see a pre-contract, especially if he agrees to like fit in the wage structure to be kind of
Yeah.
where he would be. So let's say he agrees to make somewhere just north of where Sergio Roberto is. Then obviously you sign him on the dotted line yesterday and say, okay, that gives us even a year or 2 of a cushion to really try to figure out. And I don't mean successor to Busquets. I mean a defensive midfielder. I really mean a pivot. Like
Yes.
Barcelona continues playing a 4-3-3.
Yeah. Someone
People are
to.
asking about like Busquets thing, comparing. No, I'm literally talking about if you're playing a 4-3-3, who is playing as your pivot? Because if it's not
Yeah.
Frank,
Someone to play the position. Yeah.
exactly,
like
and
like a
that's
physical replacement. Yeah.
correct. And the De Jong thing kind of goes in line with that. But again, for De Jong, as I've said many, many times before, he's already showcased in a few seasons now that if he hasn't taken that spot, is there a world where he does, right? It's like that's not it's not really not the spot where I think he's going to fit unless Barcelona changes their system around him. And with Pedri and Gavi coming to the forefront now, well, I don't think Barcelona are having any intentions to change completely around Frankie de Jong.
Right. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's too much going on, too much good going on, and particularly in the midfield with the duo that you talked about. You can't completely overhaul the system. I mean, I think there's always going to be the question of where do you put De Jong? What system do you play him in? Unfortunately, I agree with you. I don't think he's well suited to slot into the Busquets role. So I think, as far as that goes, I feel like we're probably just going to get a little bit more of the same, what we've gotten as far as usage of Frankie de Jong. I don't see him as the replacement. The Conte thing that you talked about, as far as bridges go, if he doesn't cost too much money, that is as spectacularly kind of experienced and competent and still, if not at the peak of his powers, like near the peak of his powers, a bridge as you can get. I mean, in a sense, it's almost like the inserting Lewandowski as your striker. I mean, he's about as good as there is, and for the time being, he will continue to be that. But time is going to come for him as it comes for everybody. But he is as good a transitional player in that spot as you're going to find.
Well, yeah, I wonder too if his injuries from this season will also, if anything, help Barcelona in negotiations on that wage structure, because again, he's not really been fit for the last 7-8 months. So that is a consideration on both ends, right? That's like, why would you get a player who's 32 and injured like this? Or I think he turns 32 in March. I think that's, I keep saying he's 32, but I think he's 31 now, going to be 32. Yeah, so that's where we're at on that. Again, keeping everybody healthy, as I said before. Ronald Araujo is, getting him back on the field and getting him healthy. That is what can help Barcelona win trophies, I think, almost more than any other player. I say that, but then somebody's going to go down and you go, okay, well, obviously without Lewandowski, can they score goals? Without Dembele, can they create goals? Without Pedri, can they muster up any effort in the middle of the field? Bobby running around, right? So anyway, so as I also said, priority number one, though, is what Laporta and Xavi have both now said, speaking to the media this week, that navigating their way through the Liga is the biggest priority for the rest of the season. And it's not flashy. It's not, the big headlines like Barcelona want to win La Liga. Of course they do. Like, obviously, they want to win the Liga. But even more so than the Copa del Rey, Spanish Super Cup, and the Europa League, they have prioritized winning La Liga week in and week out. And again, it's like, it's not exciting. Look at the league table and say, have to get another result against Athletic Club, have to get a result against Real Sociedad and Real Betis and Espanyol and Girona, and going down the list of the players, the players and the teams and the faces and the jerseys that we know so well, but yet that is the important thing. Pipping Real Madrid, who have all the spending, who are going to keep spending. They're going to get whoever, whatever. We'll talk about that later. But being able to beat that team to the Liga is important, and it's not about the rivalry with Real Madrid and Barcelona. It's that by winning your league in Spain against Real Madrid and against Atletico Madrid and whoever else can try to contend in Spain, winning your league is always important. So don't let the whole PSG Champions League thing neuter that down, because Barcelona are fighting with somebody who has the rival in Real Madrid, who have bigger spending power than they do. So by pipping them to that title, it does say something, right? Like with spending the way it is right now, it wasn't the last 5 years, but with spending the way it is, even though Real Madrid didn't get Mbappe, they are going to, over the next 2-3 years, outspend Barcelona 2 or 3 times. Because
by orders of magnitude.
Right. So this is the equivalent of Lille beating PSG to the title in terms of overall spending. Well, not exactly. That was like 10-1. This is like 2-1, but you get the point. So La Liga, again, it's not exciting, but that's the most important thing for this team. And I think that's, to me, the thing that I'm going to have to continue to harp on and not let people like, oh, well, La Liga is whatever, as other competitions kind of distract. But that's the point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we've talked so much about what's happened in Europe, and there was the Champions League collapses during the late stages of Messi, and then there was the year out of the Champions League, and but the last 2 years where they've gotten knocked out of the Champions League. So it's easy to kind of think of past glories and want a quick return to that, and maybe it's via the Europa League or something like that. But I think we've entered what is in the ultra modern era, something of a trophy drought or of a prestige trophy drought for Barca, and I think winning the league in Spain would go a very long way towards cementing that. Just I guess almost building on some of the good vibes and the increased confidence that we've seen, particularly this season. I think there's a little bit of beating Real Madrid to something would be a good feather in their cap, because even last year where Barca had fallen out of the Champions League, and before the Eintracht Frankfurt debacle, there was a thought that, okay, we should be favorites in the Europa League. Maybe we can do that. And Real Madrid against PSG and Manchester City, it looked like they were going out, and it was sort of the sum of all fears for Barca fans, where we fall into the Europa League and then just get bounced by Eintracht Frankfurt, while Real Madrid just pull miraculous comeback after miraculous comeback out, and then they just like go and win the Champions League, just almost nonchalantly, and so I think there is a little bit of a need to reassert, I don't know, supremacy, or at least to best Real Madrid on one front or another. And all we've really got right now is La Liga and the Copa del Rey. And I think La Liga would go a very long way towards reestablishing Barcelona, reestablishing this this project or this phase of the club, and saying that okay, we haven't won the Champions League, but we're good again. We were good enough to outlast Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, and everyone else over 38 games.
Well, speaking of the Copa del Rey, yeah, I mean, the last three winners are Real Betis last year, Barcelona the year before, and Real Sociedad the year before that.
Yeah.
And as much as I say, don't take for granted the trophy that Barcelona has won more than anybody else in Spain, it still is at a point where that's not going to move the needle. Like the Copa del Rey, winning the Copa del Rey does not bring free agents, which is, again, what Barcelona have got to rely on for at least, again, another two transfer windows, that being January and the summertime. And then we've been told that they're likely in 2024 going to be able to completely, reset and be pushing and be able to compete on that kind of limit again. But for the Copa del Rey draw, speaking of, remember that Barcelona will travel to the ground of their opponent, because their opponent is ranked lower than them in a different league, and they have drawn CF, the mighty CF Intercity, who are located in Alicante near Valencia. So I would say, it's a return of home for Iñaki Peña, who was born in Alicante. But if I'm not mistaken, Peña came in 2011, and Intercity were founded in 2017. So there is no crossover. This is a very, very new club even. When it comes time to make that match review, just to warn everybody, I might have to put a stand-in for their logo, because as far as their logo, I'm having a hard time even finding one that fits a PNG format without a little bit of work. So that's how new they are, where Google was not even recognizing their logo yet. But they did draw Barca B 0-0 earlier this year. This should be one where Barcelona can basically play Barca B players, especially because it's coming in the middle of next week. So it'll come in the middle, if I'm not mistaken, of Espanyol and Atletico Madrid. So play your young players. Pretty much you get a result. If you don't, then I'm not. Don't cry for me, Argentina. Like, that's it. The other juicy draws, though. Speaking of the Espanyol match, we'll transition to that in a second. It's Espanyol versus Celta de Vigo. So interestingly enough, Espanyol, who have Barca on the 31st, then the midweek have to not worry about, but they have to consider how they're going to rotate against Celta de Vigo, and then they have another Liga match. So Barcelona kind of an easier of that little 3-game stretch there than Espanyol. But again, they do have Atletico Madrid on the following weekend. And so that does bring up kind of what Xavi's plans are going to be, right? Who replaces Lewandowski for those 3 matches in the Liga, because he is suspended still, remind you, and what should Xavi do? Because option 1, if you will, option A in theory, is that Memphis's future looms pretty large. Like, will Memphis choose to sit out, or how will that come? And will Xavi decide to trust him at this point after he was injured for so long? We could also see reports are that Dembele will get that game off, which makes sense with that World Cup. And it's, I think people are going to overstate like what the final meant and how that might have affected him. I don't think so. Like, if anything, as you and I had spoken about during the World Cup, he was pretty consistent throughout the World Cup. Like, he
Yeah.
consistently being Dembele, and
Mhm.
Argentina, not only they shut him down, but they kind of shut everybody down, right? Like, if Dembele looks at
Yeah.
the tape, he's not going to say this is on me and Giroud. I mean, Argentina, and so much credit goes to Scaloni for just setting up not to exploit Dembele's weaknesses, but to suffocate and deny Mbappe the ball, to
Yep.
use Theo Hernandez's positioning against him, to overwhelm the midfield and take advantage of the middle of the park. So it wasn't just Dembele. It's that Deschamps decided to try to change that and try to adapt to having got his tactics wrong originally. But again, having Dembele missing voluntarily, plus Lewandowski also missing against Espanyol, it is a derby without the confidence of PK in the derby, because we
Yeah.
know PK just love to say, hey, Barcelona, like, let's stomp on their throats. But all that said, you should still be able to beat Espanyol's back four. It's Brian Olivan or Adria Pedrosa, the two left backs. Those are probably the two biggest names on the back line, like, which is crazy to say that it's Olivan or Pedrosa. So I think that Ansu Fati, Ferran Torres, and Rafinha, maybe plus Memphis, maybe not. That
Yeah.
trio should be able to get the job done against Espanyol, or else you probably don't deserve the points.
Agreed. I do think a lot hinges on Memphis, because I personally I would have no hesitation about playing him. I mean, provided he's willing to play, like, he doesn't want to sit out or anything like that. I mean, I do think it's Memphis played hard. He looked pretty good in the World Cup, and I mean, you would think he'd probably be. I mean, unless he thinks that the World Cup performance is kind of enough of a CV for whoever his next club is. Uh, if you're in a pretty decent run of form and you've got a nice runway where you can carve out 3 consecutive starts for yourself against what is it? It's Espanyol, Atletico de Madrid, and I cannot remember
Yeah, Betis.
Real Betis.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thing is, against Espanyol, Barca in general, and Memphis specifically, shouldn't struggle too much. I mean, I'm just whatever. I'll pick up PK's mantle and essentially just moderately overlook Espanyol. I mean, I guess there's maybe the reunifying of kind of the reconvening of the team post World Cup, and whether there are any just hiccups or skips in rhythm or anything like that. But if everyone is back more or less in in La Liga, in a La Liga mindset, there really shouldn't be that great of an issue, Lewandowski or not. And I think this would be a great chance for Memphis. And then, I mean, if he plays well there and he's playing confidently and he has Xavi's confidence and everything else, the next 2 games are a couple of great chances against more upper tier La Liga competition. But I think it's teams that he could do some damage against. And I know looking at the form sheet is so weird, because the last game was 6 weeks ago or something.
Yeah, you got to throw it out.
But because Atletico de Madrid have had a pretty bad run of late, and Betis have a single win in their last 5, and they got hammered 3-0 by Valencia prior to the break. So this could be a decent chance for Memphis to get in, find a groove, and really contribute to Barca as well, and kind of go out on a high and probably I don't want to say inflate, but elevate his value on the open market as well.
Yeah, because it is twofold, right? It's that, are the players who played at the World Cup who were able to stave off injury, because, again, the positive for Barcelona, and actually for most teams, I don't think there were any. Not that
there weren't any massive injuries, were there?
No, any massive injuries to keep anybody out for any long amount of time. Obviously, the extra miles on all those legs are not great for any of those players. Yeah. They do need some rest, especially, again, Dembele, who has been injury prone throughout his career, even though he's been able to be good this season. But, I think for all those players at the World Cup, it could be either they're still in form and they're still working out, right? Because usually they are playing their club football. And usually this time of the year is really congested, especially those Premier League players.
Yes.
This is usually a really congested time. So to have this time off for some of those teams is really interesting. And I'm wondering, are those teams like Espanyol, like Real Betis, who didn't really have anybody in the World Cup, are they going to be rusty? Well, I mean, Real Betis had 1 or 2 players, but they weren't even like the regular starters, like the rotation piece in the midfield were playing.
Yep.
for other teams. Rayo Vallecano had somebody, right? Like that kind of thing, right? They had like one or
Yeah.
two players here and there down the Liga table. But for Espanyol and the like, right? Like they played Copa del Rey last week. I mean, Espanyol was pretty trash in the Copa del Rey. Like they managed to
Yeah.
move on, but they were not good at all. Like they barely snuck by a lower division side.
Yep.
And so you have to take consideration that Barcelona might be able to take their players who are kind of coming back in maybe a little bit of form, or at least having played and being match fit and hit the ground
Yep.
running. Or the opposite of that is that these other teams have been preparing and preparing and preparing, and they're ready to go and they're up to it. While Barcelona are just kind of try to say, all right, I know everybody, let's refocus, let's everybody heads in. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, like let's ease back into this thing and just
right.
and because it is tempting to look at Espanyol. I mean, they're not just formed. I mean, their league standing is
Bottom.
very, very poor. Yeah. And, if you assume that Sevilla is going to find some sort of form at some point, I mean, it comes down to, it's Espanyol and Celta de Vigo right now are 2 points adrift of anyone else, trying to battle to stay out of that last relegation spot. So on the one hand, if Espanyol comes in with the right mentality, I mean, they have to look at every game as if not a must win, at least, rack up some results where you can.
I also, as you said, don't want to spend too much time on them just because they don't,
Yeah.
not say that they aren't talented enough to worry about, but like at the end of the day, like their squad is one that we don't need to take too much into consideration. Just
No.
want it more.
It's more so how Barca come into the game. I mean, the good thing is, other than Dembele and Koundé, no Barcelona player of note was in the semifinals or the final.
Nope. Yeah.
So Lewandowski's gotten some rest. Araujo has gotten some rest. The Spanish contingent, they've been hanging out. So in that sense, the World Cup, in a weird way, given the lack of international success for Barca's players, the French guys notwithstanding, in a weird way might actually be great, because not only did they not have this long gap from competitive football the way the rest of La Liga did, they got to play competitive football and essentially stay in that sort of rhythm, but also got bounced out early enough where they, by the time they take the pitch against Espanyol, I mean, they'll have had, what's it going to be, 2-3 weeks off? And, so in that sense, it's actually pretty good. They got to play for about 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks to sort of lick any wounds and recharge their batteries.
Yep. And I've been tracking and figuring out who's returned to training, when they returned to training. Obviously Eric Garcia, he got off the plane and went right to it because he didn't play the World Cup. But speaking of training, though, kind of my gift to the academy heads, or to the La Masia heads, I go a few weeks without mentioning it, but it really has been interesting to me over the last, about 2 weeks or so, 2.5 weeks since they really came back into full force in training. It's been interesting, the players and the young players I'm talking about here that have had repeat call-ups this week and last week for training. So it may be a youngster or two that we'll see in the Copa del Rey, but also maybe not, because there were also a bunch of injuries for Barça Athletic. So that's why you probably haven't seen the likes of Alvaro Sanz, Alexi Garrido, Irash Akomash, or Pablo Torre, by the way. So Pablo Torre, really bad timing for an injury for him. He picked up either in training, and then it didn't get better for Barça Athletic when he played for them. So Pablo Torres, unfortunately for him, might miss a bus, like a really important bus that he needed to get on. But yeah, in the likes of Akomash, Garrido, Sanz, bad timing for their injuries as well. So also for Barça Athletic, because they continue to play throughout this entire World Cup, they played pretty much every weekend. So a lot of those players have stuck with the Barça Athletic and Rafa Marquez and are like training as a team, doing their thing. That's why we haven't always seen Marc Casado. We saw him once or twice last week, but we haven't seen too much of him. So I'm going backwards in time here. Yesterday was Chadi Riyad, who I think you're going to see in the Copa del Rey midweek against Intercity. And then there's Lamine Yamal, Danny Rodriguez, and Angel Alacon. Tuesday was Yamal, Hector Fort, Estanis Pedrola, Rodriguez again, and Arnau Rafus. Monday was Fort, Pedrola, Rodriguez, and Rafus again. Last Friday was Rafus, the goalkeeper, Fort, Arnau Canas, Alacon, Rodriguez, Yamal, Gerard Hernandez, Gerard Hernandez, Sergi Dominguez, and Xavi Moreno, as well as Casado, as I said. And then earlier last week, it was Yamal, Casas, Sport, Unai, Hernandez, Rodriguez, and Alarcon, plus goalkeeper Ander Estrelaga. So a few notes here. As I said about the UEFA Youth League, which Barca will still be contesting, the names that you just heard are primarily U19 or Juvenil or even lower. But the names are some of the ones we've heard to expect with the highest potential. It's not just like a random position. It's the names we've heard, with exception of the goalkeepers. The goalkeepers are the goalkeepers that are available that aren't Barca Athletic goalkeepers. So unlike the Youth League, there were less Barca B names, I said, like Victor Barbera, who's been scoring goals in the Youth League. He's been scoring goals for Barca Athletic. He actually leads. He's their leading goal scorer with 4. And he's still technically a U19 player. So Barbera also going to be a free agent in the summer. So I wonder how the club is going to handle him. But yeah, that's why you're not hearing him in first team training, because he is with Barca Athletic, with Juvenil, the U19s. He's getting game action somewhere. And then there's no Chus Alba or Antonio Aranda or Alex Carbonell, some of those midfielders that we would expect that are the starters for Barca Athletic. As I said, the first team training call-ups right now are younger, and those guys are still playing for Marquez's team right now. So the 5 names that repeated the most are those that are interesting to me, and I would just want to go through those individually. Pedrola, the winger, made his first team debut last season, if you remember, and he was likely called up to first team training because he just got fit recently last week, and then he made his season debut for Barca Athletic over the weekend. And Xavi looked at him last year, was interested in what he could bring to the table. So I think he's taking a look at him again and kind of just using first team training to get him back into a little bit of fitness. And then I don't need to tell you about Yamal, but he should be highlighted here because there are new concerns that his camp may be asking for a bit more money than is reasonable with his professional contract when he turns 16 in the summer, I think July. But that could also be outside interference trying to unsettle the player or the club, because he is good, but he's 15, but he's good. But Gavi, Ansu, and Pedri were 16, and he's not them, but he's good. And you get the idea. Where it seems like the club, what I do believe is the club has put forth the notion that he's going to be training with the first team now. Maybe he'll be training some throughout the spring. And then, because he's still 15, he'll likely do preseason as a 16-year-old with the first team. Whether he just does the local part of it in Catalonia, and he doesn't go on whatever trip they go to either Asia or North America or wherever they go. Maybe they stay in Europe, wherever. He may not travel with them, but Yamal is going to get an opportunity to impress under Xavi. And that, of course, is going to affect contract negotiations. But I think that his group basically says by 17, he should be around the first team. And with everything we've heard, this is the level of prospect you're talking about. So I think for the club to put out a plan in a way they didn't even for Ico Bravo, I'm not saying they learned the lesson from Ico Bravo, who went to Leverkusen, made his first team debut at 16, and then now he's with Real Madrid, of course, with their Castilla. But I think for Yamal, it's a little bit of a different situation where they're going, they're getting right into it. And then, all right, do you want to speak for Yamal? And then I'll get the other 3 real quick.
So yeah, I mean, I'm admittedly I am not among the biggest of the La Masia heads. I mean, he is, I kind of know him by name, by reading, and from the occasional bit of video. But from what I've read, I mean, it's kind of like you said. He's not even if he's not a Gavi or Pedri level prospect, which who among them is really? And but like you said, he's a very good player, and at the very least, he deserves. And I can almost speak generally, and where he actually fits into the team as currently comprised, or as will be comprised in a year's time, let's say, or something, is remains to be seen. But I do think that when you have someone of excellent potential and potentially an excellent senior player in the building, like on your team, I do think it's only responsible to treat them as such. And I don't mean, overemphasize their impact to the team, but he's, based on everything I've read, everything I've seen, he's worthy of a shot. He deserves to carve out his place in his future at Barca. And
well, he's the best attacking prospect since Ansu Fati in the academy. It's him as far as a forward winger. in the middle. Like we don't even know he'll play eventually, but at
Yeah.
this point, I think he'll come up as a winger and then kind of figure it out where he can do the least amount of damage. And it's not just Jamal either, though. The other three here, next up is Hector Fort, a 16-year-old right back playing for the U19s and in the youth league. So you've probably heard about him from me earlier, either over summertime or here in the fall. But even last season, the reason you may not have heard of it because he was 14, 15. I don't really say those names to you, but last season he was a center back and fighting for playing time at his age level as a center back. But now he's a right back and Barca's most promising right back at that. And that's how quickly that changes for these young players. It can change in a matter of weeks and months. So he does have a birthday in August. So again, he just basically turns, he's like, 16 and a half now. So next season, I would already put him on the big radar, just like Yamal. I mean, as a right back prospect, depending on what they do at that position, and if they don't get it sorted with the money situation. So if you're asking, would I trust next season, next August, a 17-year-old over Bellerin? I'm not saying I would, and I'm not saying I wouldn't. I'm saying that they're both in training. So what is Xavi seeing? And
I'd be interested to roll the dice. I would at least give it a spin.
Yeah. So then the next one is 17-year-old Danny Rodriguez, an attacking midfielder who can also play on the wing. Those two qualities give him a Pedri at Las Palmas vibe. Okay, and I'm putting the disclaimer real quick here. I'm not comparing what Pedri is today on potential for Danny Rodriguez because Danny's 17. So I'm just saying that the player that I watched at Las Palmas at 15 in Pedri is what Danny Rodriguez reminds me of at 17 playing against 18-year-olds. Okay, so big difference. Las Palmas in the second division, 15-year-old Pedri playing against adults to what Danny Rodriguez does against 18 and 19-year-olds. So he's thought of pretty highly, though, and for good reason. And it's interesting to me as well that of all the midfielders in the academy, that it's Rodriguez who keeps getting called up to training. And as I keep reminding you, attacking midfielders and those interiors, it seems to be the hardest position for to get called up to first team training. You never know, it's constant competition. Again, on the Copa del Rey depth chart, it could still be Chus Alba and Antonio Aranda and other players who we even saw in the preseason in front of Danny Rodriguez. But from the U19 group, he seems to be the one that Xavi is saying, yeah, I wanted to see this guy in training day in and day out. We've seen him quite a few times. And the last one on the list here is Angel Alarcon. He used to be very, very fast, but unfortunately, now being 18, he's missed more than a year, had some pretty awful injuries to his knees, and he's finally trying to get back to fitness. So he is and was one of the more promising forwards in the academy and able to play through the middle at lower levels, but is now shaping up as a winger as he gets older. So he's interesting because his ceiling was so high, and now at 18, you wonder what time he can make up for and what condition he can be in as well. Because he's still a teenager, though, still 18. Yeah. So, asking how he can heal from being on the shelf for so long, again, main primary question. But I am glad that Xavi is giving him an opportunity in first team training to show where he's at and try to use even that first team training to get back to hopefully get some essence of what the right track is for this player. Again, 18 is not a death sentence at all for a young player like that, but physically you hope he can get back to what he was because, again, his physical tools were there. And, he does also profile a bit like, I'm now realizing I'm overusing if it's a guy who shows up in space, but you're not entirely trusting him to score, is becoming Ferran Torres. But unfortunately for you, he does remind me of a Ferran Torres where he scored a bit more at youth level. But again, Ferran Torres at Valencia was also absolutely totally lighting it up at youth level for Valencia in terms of the goal scoring. So Ana Halacon is kind of that. He takes up space well. He makes good runs. Again, he had a bit more speed than Torres did even at youth level, but we'll have to see where he's at. So the reason I bring all this up, though, why did I have the whole thing? Why did I update you on all those players? I talk about the academy kids because there is, of course, a lot of gloom and doom that Barca missed out on Andre Santos to Chelsea. That's the new name this week, the Vasco da Gama midfielder who I watched, and just to give my 2 cents on it, would have been cool if he come to Barca, but I also don't think he's the pivot that everyone's saying he is. I think he's much more of a box-to-box guy, gets forward a bit more, and I think he reminds me a bit more of I don't want to say Paulinho, but I don't know. I don't exactly know who he's going to be, but I don't see him as the pivot that everyone thinks he's going to be. Maybe he turns out to be that way, and I'm wrong, but I also don't think he's going to get many chances for Chelsea. So we'll have to see how his career goes. And then obviously it's a Real Madrid thing. It's Endrick to Real Madrid. It's Tchouaméni to Real Madrid. Probably Jude Bellingham to Real Madrid. And Enzo Fernandez going to somebody, wherever he goes, right? Manchester United or wherever. So you get the idea. Every young talent is going to get snatched up by somebody else in the next 2 years. but there will be others. Like that's what I'm kind of saying here. And
Yep.
Barca, not only do they have some of them in their academy, but there are still others that will be in play for Barcelona, right? So even this week, right? Alan Varela of Boca Juniors,
Mhm.
Mukuku, he's a free agent, but he's either going to go to Chelsea or he likely is going to renew with Borussia Dortmund. Who knows?
Mhm.
But those players are both in play, so we'll have to wait and see. Like there is a world. Unfortunately, I'm saying at the same time, but because Neil Gardner on Twitter, it's such a big name now and so
Mhm.
popular. A lot of the names that I have are overlapping with him. But if Barcelona had a summer where they brought in Alan Varela for less than 20 million euros somewhere, they brought in
Mhm.
Ana Martinez for less than 20 million euros, and they brought in and they found a way to get Mukuku, and maybe they even signed Kante if they're going to get rid of Kessier. That's a fine summer. Like bringing in those four players and
Yeah.
then also getting promotions to Yamal and whoever, right? And then whoever it may be, then Costado gets a few more games or Riyad gets a few more games, right? Or and then by the way, also Inigo Martinez, center back with left-footed center back for Athletic Club. He likely
Yeah.
is on the way too. So the other thing, the last point here, then Emile, I'll give you the full runway here, is
Mhm.
that Barca in theory are already pretty young. The average age
Yeah.
of the squad is down to 25.6 years old after Piqué left, and that would drop down more when Busquets leaves, likely over
Yes.
summer. So if Barca start Balde, Eric Garcia, Araujo, and Kunde, something we could see. Kunde
Yeah.
is the oldest one there, just turning 24 recently. And if you
Yep.
play Pedri and Gavi and De Jong, the average age of that midfield is 22.5 years old. And for the
Yes.
forward, if you go Ansu, Ferran Torres, and Dembele, the average age of the forward line there is 23. And even goalkeeper, you have Pena and you have Arnaud Tenas, both under 24. So
Yep.
it's a problem that Barca have had that they've been too old for a while. But
Yeah.
right now, they're both too old and too young. So if you continue to see links to N'Golo Kante, it's not so crazy. Like he's 32, one of the
Yeah.
best in his position, and we'd be coming on a free. So injuries and wages are the concern, but you have to trust Alemany and Cruyff and the rest to do their jobs correctly. And it does mean that scouting is going to be really, really essential for Barcelona moving forward.
Yeah.
But I think from all of our perspectives, it's been frustrating to watch them bring in players that just don't make a lot of sense. So yeah, that's why I use all those names. I give you all those
Yeah.
names. It's like it feels like really it does, especially in this time period in January. It's going to be like Barcelona miss out another one, they miss out another one, they miss out
Mhm.
another one. But talk to me in 4 or 5 or 6 years, right? Because even like that's the thing about winning the Liga this year. Like Barcelona have a squad this year to win the Liga, and that Liga trophy is going to count as much as the first trophy that Endrick wins in the Liga for Real Madrid in 2029, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a Liga trophy in 2029 with Endrick, but it's also a Liga trophy right now in 2023 with the squad that Barcelona made.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think you were talking about so I think there's two different parts of that. Yeah. When you were talking about the age, post PK, but we still have, I was thinking immediately, there's Busquets, Jordi Alba, and well, Lewandowski, obviously. I mean, and Ter Stegen's older than that average age, but and the good thing the Barca have is, like you said, there was the problem that the team was too old, and it was tough to sort of blend in the young guys because there was just too many legacy guys and too many of the old guard or expensive veterans and things like that. Now, exactly like you say. I mean, two of the older, I put in quotes, Lewandowski and I mean, I wouldn't even call Ter Stegen that, but two of the guys who kind of bring that average up are two of the best players on the team. So that's not a concern. Busquets is winding down his time, and yeah, I mean, so beyond that kind of handful of players, you start looking and everyone is incredibly young, and they seem to be young in a way. They're young and experienced in a lot of cases. I mean, just sort of experienced beyond their years because Pedri and Gabi have played meaningful first team international football. Well beyond what their ages would suggest they would have under their belts. And similarly with De Jong and all the other guys. I think that what you're saying is exactly right. I don't know that you mentioned earlier, they're not really going to be in play for a lot in January. So even if anyone who is actually saying Barca missed out on, this, that, and the other, I mean, I don't know if that's actually a reasonable reasonable statement to make. I mean, and there is enough on this roster to hold on and mount a, I mean, not mount a challenge, but hold on for a La Liga title. Um, what you're saying actually makes so much sense, and I think we've had different versions of this conversation before. That for a long time, at least, leading up to this season, and you could even argue last summer, there's been such an emphasis on looking outside of the club and acquiring and purchasing players, where if you can even just get contributors or just solid above average squad players out of your academy, where they're not costing you a massive sum of money, and they also are settled in with the club, they're settled into the region, like you have, they're more of a known quantity even if they are much younger. I think that's exactly the way forward for Barca. I mean, at least until they have that big financial reset that they're talking about, and I mean, arguably even beyond, because there's nothing wrong with keeping some of your powder dry. You don't have to necessarily, you don't have to, do this kind of pseudo galactical, thing of, the minute you have, anything resembling a hole, go and, try to spend 60 million on, on filling it. Those opportunities will come up and you need to take advantage of them, but that shouldn't be your default setting. And I do think that, I mean, like we talked about earlier, I think like N'Golo Kante would be almost an ideal bridge for a specific position, but also for a very young team. I mean, just because everything you ever hear about N'Golo Kante is just he's just tireless worker, and just he's no kind of sort of prima donna, and there's no kind of ego clashes that you've ever heard of with him, either whether at Leicester or Chelsea or wherever.
Yep.
And so I think those are the kinds of veterans that you bring in. But the bones of an incredible team are there, and those guys just happen to be young. I mean, I think a lot of it is sticking with them and supplementing them with what you have in the academy as well, because these guys are going to be your veterans. And there seems to be a pathway to sustainability here as far as turning the squad over in a little bit more of an organic manner and not having to do these like massive overhauls. And I think I do appreciate when you do these when you go through the La Masia guys and you talk about them this way, because it is by and large, unless people are really doing the homework, and I'll admit I don't do a ton of the La Masia homework, it's easy to fall into that trap of only looking out and just saying, who can we buy? Who's the next prospect and whatever. Yeah. When in fact they could just be there. Like they're useful players.
Yeah, I want to say about the academy. I mean, that's the thing that I can't stress enough over the years. That if you've been with me for a while, like I wouldn't say there's a lot of names that I've said to you that I've hyped up in the past. Like I said, for a while there, Andre Oriana was like this guy that was supposed to be, this successor, and he had all those injuries. And not to make excuses for him, but now he's a bench player for Andorra. He's not even a starter for Andorra. Yeah. As I try to keep up with him. And there have been so many players, right? Like Gerard Deulofeu was supposed to be like one of the most can't miss prospects that we've had in 20 years. And look what happened to Deulofeu. I mean, he's still a quality professional. A lot of these players are quality professionals. I mean, honestly, that's what they produce. It's just how high does their ceiling go? And what I have to say is about like the level of potential, the level of prospect, it does have to do with a lot of, that's why every prospect that goes to Chelsea, I question that move. Not because Chelsea would be the wrong place to go. Like they get to live in London in a great neighborhood. And Chelsea is a great place to get a football education. But for Andre Santos to get the opportunities he had for what Chelsea's goals are, it's going to be really hard for a player like that to go from the second division of Brazilian football. And I mean, we've seen so many Brazilians struggle by going and jumping into the Premier League like that before making some other stop. Like that's why people are worried about Varela jumping right from Barcelona, right from Boca Juniors to Barcelona. But again, at 21, like I've watched the guy play, like I feel like that's not a crazy step to go from the Argentine first division with Boca Juniors playing in the Copa Libertadores to playing in the Liga. Like it's not that crazy of a step again for a 21-year-old who, I'll talk about him at a later date. But in terms of the academy kids, right, that I say that it is difficult to note who's going to make it. And even though the potential might be really, really high, like I try to reiterate to people that like I'm not trying to overhype Yamal to you, but I'm telling you that he is spoken about in the academy by those coaches as having the most potential. Like, we're not doing this whole messy thing, but he has the most potential as a forward since Ansu came through. When I talked about Alejandro Balde from the age of 14, I said if he was able to stay healthy and continue upon this linear progress, which is what kids do not do, but if he's able to stay on that path, he's going to be the left back of Barcelona. Right. And now I get to go take my victory lap because Alejandro Balde is Alejandro Balde. I had mentioned Gavi's name. I had said when he was 14 years old, hey, there's this kid playing for the kid at Oz at the U16 level who's just 14. Right. And it's like there are those. And then I'm doing right now of even the 5 names I gave you. I gave you Pedrola, but he is an 18-year-old winger. Who knows? Right. I mentioned Anhar Alakan, an 18-year-old winger. Who knows? Right. Like we don't know about those wingers. But when I say that Hector Fort is a 16-year-old right back who is now he's getting first team training and he's already getting pipped for the UEFA Youth League, which is U19 level, and he's playing for the U19s, and he's 16, and he's a right back, a position of need. Like, I'm trying to just give you hints. Like, it might not work out, but I'm mentioning his name for this reason, that he is the now right back in Barcelona system with the highest potential for quite a few years. Like, I'm trying to think back, and it has been like no player has turned 17 because they keep the bunch left at the U15, 16 age, but this is the highest ranked U16 or when he turned 17-year-old right back prospect that Barca have had in a considerable amount of time. I'm going to argue maybe since Juan Miranda. Like, that's what we're talking about, right? Yeah. And look, even what happened to Miranda. He wasn't the guy. He didn't become the guy, but he also came up at the wrong time. Like, it wasn't if Miranda was Montoya, Martin Montoya, then Juan Miranda would have been Martin Montoya, right? Like, if there was a need at the time, then he would have had that time, but it wasn't in the cards. And then I mentioned Yamal as well, again, for the same reason that Yamal, I've heard about him since he was 12 years old. And there's been other 12-year-olds that we've heard about that have crashed out. But now that he's 15 years old, it's been 3 years, and he's, again, training with the first team, U19s. If you get called to first team training and Xavi seems to like you and the club is obviously trying to keep your services, there's a reason I'm going to say his name, right? That's not me, the academy, and that's everybody else. So, I just want to put a little bow on that and say that while the academy, they expect that Barcelona is going to produce first team players year in and year out, like, we have to trust what Francesc Tomas said on this podcast so many times. If 1 or 2 come out of any generation we're talking 2-3 years. If you get 1 or 2 in a 2-3 year period, you've had a really good stretch there. But because of Barca's financial constraints, they've had to rely more on their academy. And their academy, it's worked out really well that they've had these high-level prospects come through almost back to back in Ansu
and be be capable of playing. So because as much as I hate to put it in these terms, I mean, it is like, and I don't mean it in the sort of the cold, sort of the cold capitalistic terms of it. A little bit of youth development is kind of, it's venture capital. It's ideally, like, you out of every 20 kids that comes in, if you get 1 or 2 quality contributors, that is a pretty good hit rate, and that more than covers any other shortfalls that might be. I mean, I think we hear about all these top prospects, and it's easy and tempting and hopeful to dream on all of them hitting their 90th or 99th percentile outcomes as senior pros.
Right.
And if that happens, I mean, that's when you get, Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, Puyol, like that's when you end up with, Guardiola's Barca teams. But if you get quality contributors, 1 a year or, something like that, and they don't even have to be stars, but just, there's something to be said for rounding out your depth with, above average players. Like, it doesn't get the heart racing a lot of times, but that's what wins you, particularly leagues, over a long season, is people get tired, people get injured, and people get suspended, and you need to, it minimizes the drop off too from your first team stars to whatever is behind them. And that's what, guides you through a long campaign. Maybe not a knockout match, but you need that in league play.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good transition, I think, to our last segment here and about the Barca Femení. You were at the game yesterday against
Yeah.
Rosengard, but they absolutely blew them off the field. And I think, I'm seeing this in the numbers too, even though a lot of credit to the zone who have
Yeah.
had, who've had, I think just a wonderful plan as far as broadcasting and getting those
Mhm.
games out and making those Champions League games available, and even making some of the league games available. It's been really great this season, so I'm really happy with what the zone has done. But unfortunately, I think with Alexi Buteas being out the whole season, it's certainly taken a lot of the luster out of it. Most of the questions I get about the Femini are about when Alexi Buteas is coming back. For
Sure.
good reason too. She is the best player in the world now 2 years running, and she's been
Yep.
missing the entire year. So, I was also with Barca Femini a few weeks ago, losing to Bayern Munich in the group stage of the Champions League. There was a bit of gloom and doom, but they still handily won the group. And I know it sounds crazy, but if you look at all of the Champions League contenders, they all had some kind of hiccup or looked less than invincible in the group stage of the Champions League. So the
Yeah.
women's Champions League is pretty wide open for the first
Yes.
time in a while. It feels like that at this point, and so they could easily round into form. Like looking at you, Lyon, who survived. I mean, literally survived. Like should not
Yeah.
have been there. Should have been eliminated in the group stage, but they survived. And by the way, having those number of contenders is great for women's football. I just want to throw out there too. So while Rosengard didn't put up much of a fight against Barca yesterday, it was nice to see that almost every group was contested until the final match day. So,
Yes.
last thing is I know it does seem like an oversight, and we unfortunately are running out of time here. So, I do want to touch on where the Femini is right now, but
Yeah.
I'm not really going to be getting into the debate about what's raging on right now in the women's game, and that's about the ACLs and about the injuries, particularly Vivian Miedema of Arsenal going down recently,
Yeah.
joining Alexi Buteas, and a ton of the other top players. Of the list of players that are down right now with ACLs, it's like 6 of the top 12 players in the
Yeah.
women's game are all on the shelf for long-term injuries, including ACL. So,
And then, yeah, because I mean, even like Carolyn Graham Hansen is out, not with an ACL, but she has her own like muscle injury
injuries.
in
Yeah,
her
yeah.
in her
So,
leg. She's been out for
and
and
I had said that she was going to be the most important player with Alexia out for so much of this season. So, then
yeah,
she's going to be missing. So, as I said, it's not my place, and I haven't put together the proper ideas and opinions from the right people who know better. So this issue isn't going away, like the injuries in the women's game. So we'll visit that later. But for now, who is still healthy for the Femini are doing quite well, Emile.
yes,
And, yesterday, all of the back line scored.
yeah, that was awesome.
The
I
Rolfo
mean,
goal in particular with Aitana Baimati was certainly the highlight. Of course, that Baimati touch on the assist.
yep.
And it's interesting because I
And
think
then Moppy's absolute rocket
the
into
free kick,
the
yeah, not
yeah.
saying that's expected, but
I
I
mean,
kind
kind of
of want
is.
in your report. I kind of want your report, but where I want to begin
Yeah,
with your report is Rolfo's goal because
yeah,
by becoming a top left back and arguably the top left back in the sport by shifting back there, like
yeah,
defensively, she hasn't entirely given you everything she needed to, but physically, she is always a little bit taller,
yes,
usually taller than the wingers she's contending with,
yes,
and just physically, she can outmuscle and she has the physical tools, even if the positioning isn't always there. But then
yeah,
obviously she's a winger at heart. She's constantly going to get forward. So let's start there tactically. But yeah, from the Feminese case, like it was more Banmati, but I feel like this team is by trying to find their identity without Alexi Buteas, it's hard to kind of pin that down with all the injuries they've had in and out. But yesterday it kind of felt like it was one of those, we know who we are, we're better than them, let's take care of business.
yeah. Um, so I have season tickets to Femini, so I've actually been to all of the league matches and the two at Camp Nou. And what's really interesting to watch, even just away from the action, I mean, you touched on it. I think first to take a step back and kind of sing the praises of Fridolina Rolfo because
Yeah.
I mean, she was a Ballon d'Or finalist, and she finished 19th in the voting this year, and she's hands down one of the best players in the world. And last year she started at so now she's moved to left back, but she's also played at right back. And last year she played, I believe, one of the games at at various points in the Champions League and even in league play. She dabbled in the midfield. I mean, she's played up front in a pinch for short stretches. Her just versatility, but also I mean, I guess lack of ego or sort of commitment to squad harmony is really incredible because she essentially committed to becoming the full time first choice left back because they brought in another, superstar right back. And there was no ruffled feathers and there was, just, no complaints whatsoever. And in a weird, I mean, I think the back line that they have right now of Rolfo, Mapileon, Paredes, and Bronze, when the four of them are playing together, is absolutely spectacular because, yeah, while Rolfo is the one that is obviously looking to get forward more, I think just her strength, but also her height, and thus, she's able to cover so much ground when she has to make up ground, getting back from having bombed forward. And she is absolutely spectacular at breaking up opposition passing moves while she's sort of retreating back on defense. That is one of the things that I've noticed that is, and, even when you're at a game, like, you always get the kind of those rounds of applause for that, where she nonchalantly just comes in. You worry that she might be out of position, but within 3 or 4 strides, she's not only in position, she's knocked the ball back to Paredes or Mapileon or whoever, and now we're resetting and, ready to go again. So I think I think speaking more broadly, the absence of Alexia, I actually thought a lot about this, and it's tough to call anyone on Barça Femení really sort of unsung in the sense that I feel like outside of Alexia and maybe Aitana and, I feel like they're simultaneously all either all unsung or the collective receives so much praise that it's impossible for anybody to be unsung. So I don't know where exactly I found this, but I always think I think you and I talked about Patri in the past. I think there's this core of Paredes, Rolfo, Patri, and honestly, Marta Torrejon have been just absolutely incredible at almost keeping a sense of stability and, keeping the whole ship, on course. And then you have the spectacular play of, Aitana and, Carolyn Graham Hansen before she got hurt, in the first 3 games. And, you get Claudia Pina popping up and doing ridiculous things. And, the 2 newcomers, Salma and Geise, are absolutely ridiculous. And so in a weird way, it's kind of been Alexia by committee. And it's been really impressive watching them. And in a weird way, I think when Alexia comes back, just given her the way that she both has total command over the pitch and is the talisman for the team, but also doesn't, I guess for lack of a better word, doesn't kind of rule with an iron fist in that role.
Yeah.
I think the team is going to be just all that much better for it. I mean, the people who've been deputized into these roles. I mean, like I said, I talked about Patri, and we talked about Kira Walsh, who has found her stride with the team, and now kind of plays a perfect. I mean, I don't want to say like a Busquets role, but sort of she's just an absolute rock in that spot, and and like Chernogorjevic has just been there every game. So I think everyone has had a chance to sort of grow into a bigger role out of necessity, and they still have such an absolute wellspring of talent, and just, the bench would be good enough to win most of their matches. And it's been really fascinating to watch because it's a team of stars that doesn't have a superstar, and at the moment, and potentially that will be Aitana or whatever, but they're putting in really cool to watch collaborative efforts. Everyone seems to be bought in on the fact that we're all excellent, but we're only going to actually get this done together. And I mean, that was always the case when Alexia was there also. But I think with Alexia, you had this leading light. It was just, you have the mega super duper star, and then you all just get to be this incredible ensemble around her. But now but there's still the ensemble. Everyone's kind of stepped up, but no one has seemed to, I don't know. Everyone seems to have a proper gauge on what their role is in this system. And it's been just the whole that evolution of this team and how the new players who've come in and the holdovers and everyone. It's incredible that it's been such a smooth, almost seamless transition from one year to the next, and also just the massive absence of Alexia and then also Graham Hansen as well.
Well, I think, of course, here on the show and the content that I produce, we wind up kind of revving it up as the spring happens, because with this Femení team, their legacy gets decided with trophies and gets decided in the spring and later in the spring as well, depending on how far they go in the Champions League. So we'll continue to talk more and more about this team as the months go on. Like, not to say that the fall and the first half of their season is always boring, but you kind of know where they're going to be. They've pretty much already wrapped up the first division incredibly already. And then how far are they going to go in the Copa del Rey? How far do they get in the Champions League, of course? And their metric, unfortunately, is the PSG thing, where it's going to be decided how far they go.
Yeah, it's Champions League. Yeah, it's always Champions League or bust. And I mean, I think almost the interesting part of watching them, from the start of the season until about, January, February. So I guess, up until the knockouts of the Champions League. And I feel like, I guess there's no other way for this to come off. So I was going to say, I don't mean this to sound as sort of patronizing to the domestic competition that they face, as it will, but what are you going to do?
I think I will say, though, they've had a few it's been stronger than the last two seasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, Real Sociedad a few weeks ago, gave them all they wanted. I mean, they needed 2 goals to pull out a 2-1 win in the last 25 minutes, and I mean, it wasn't a cakewalk.
Which is good. Like, the thing with the Femení too is, like, can they be challenged? Can some other team give them some kind of proper fight before it's time to face down the other giants of Europe?
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of what it feels like, I mean, particularly against sort of mid-table and lower table, La Liga or Liga F competition, it almost feels more like I'm going to the theater than I'm going to, a competitive sporting event.
Right.
And, not that that's bad, I mean, it's eminently enjoyable, but it is, it's nice to see them, in a weird way, as jarring as the Bayern Munich loss was, it was good to sort of see them just get their feathers ruffled a little bit and just see, they were never not going to advance from the champion, from the group or anything like that. I mean, they were never even really ever going to not win the group, but it was nice to see how do they recover from hitting this little speed bump? And does it turn into sort of a protracted slump, or do they just get back down to business? And, I mean, they've done what they've had to do. They've beaten Benfica in Portugal and Rosengard here, 12-2 on aggregate. And so they've done exactly, what it is you would ask them to do.
Yep. So again, we'll keep eyes on them throughout this season. But I think that'll wrap up another edition of a show. It was a long one, but yeah, I hope you got to do this while you were sitting around with family and friends and enjoying your holiday. I likely will have some kind of content out next week. I'm not sure exactly what it'll be. I might not bother any guests to join me. I might not bother any of your friends to be here on the show with me. So we'll have some kind of thing next week before, again, action begins against Espanyol on the 31st. So yeah, weird thing, but I appreciate everyone who stuck with me for 2022. This is now year 5. I think now technically 2023, we're entering year 6 of the podcast. So boy, oh boy, it winds up taking up more and more of your life. Like, even it's crazy to think that when this show started, CF's Intercity was not yet a team. They had yet to play. They were 2 months. They had just been founded 2 months prior to us. Putting this all together. They were 2 months away from playing their first match in Intercity when this podcast started. So that's how long it's been in your ears, and I really appreciate, especially those who've been with me since the very beginning. So again, this is the holiday season. I get really grateful and appreciative. So before I start to get all emotional here on the show, Emile, let's get this out of here. So Twitter, Instagram for him, for me, Close Research Group, Barcelona Podcast, that, Patreon, Discord, YouTube channel, all that gobbledygook. You know where to find us at this point if you're still with us. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. And Forza Barça.
Forza Barça.